Hello, I'm Jake Boudreau, civic journalist at Tello Community Television. This week, on The Record, we speak about Bill C-49. On June 13th, the Senate Standing Committee on Energy, the Environment, and Natural Resources held a hearing in Ottawa about Bill C-49, which would expand the mandate of the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board to regulate offshore renewables like wind energy. Natural Resources and Renewables Minister Tory Rushton was in Ottawa to speak in favor of the legislation. The federal and provincial governments jointly manage Nova Scotia's offshore, and to allow for offshore wind development, both governments need to amend their respective legislation before the province can issue the first call for bids for offshore wind licenses planned for 2025. A delegation from Nova Scotia attended the Senate meeting to show their support for Bill C-49. This included Daryl McDonald, CEO of Bud Ledeck Development Corporation, on behalf of Bud Ledeck Chief Wilbert Marshall. Also in attendance was Gordon McDonald, Director of Economic Development for the Municipality of the District of Guysborough. And finally, also in attendance was Richmond Warden Amanda Mumbrikat.
I was going to ask you about the going to the Senate Standing Committee on Energy, the Environment, and Natural Resources on June 13th regarding Bill C-49.
Yeah.
Do you feel the case was made and that it was necessary that you be there and show support for the industry?
Yeah, so obviously with the renewable energy developments that are happening in Richmond County related to hydrogen, I felt it was important. The provincial government asked me to be part of a delegation, had the support of council to do that. At the end of the day, this is enabling legislation. It's not legislation related to a specific project, and so I think it was important for the Senate committee to be able to see members from the rural communities that are going to be impacted potentially there, but it's important for them to hear all sides of the discussion. And certainly, appreciate the comments from folks in the Indigenous community and the fisheries community. Their comments need to be taken into account here. This is an important piece, of planning for our future. At the end of the day, we've had the CNSOPB, the Offshore Petroleum Board, regulating oil and gas in our waters for many, many years. In my estimation, they're the best people to continue to do that work on the marine renewables side, because what we've also seen from them is an openness to have those discussions with other stakeholders and rights holders who are potentially going to be impacted by these new developments, and that's the open dialogue we have to continue to have. So I think it was definitely a worthwhile trip and a worthwhile conversation, and appreciated the opportunity to be there. But at the end of the day, this is one step in an early stage that has to be at the beginning or near the beginning of a whole lot more consultation with ocean users.
Not the first time that this issue has come up from the fisheries community. The Richmond County Inshore Fishermen's Association just a couple of months ago issuing concerns about the placement of the turbines and of the various operations. Yeah. Back in December, during an open house held by Cape Breton Partnership and Net Zero Atlantic, local fishermen expressing concerns. Does council and the other proponents and stakeholders in green hydrogen and wind energy have some work to do in terms of the communication?
Oh, definitely. And I think that the work that the regional offshore assessment, offshore wind assessment is doing, that is a critical piece of work. They've identified 6 areas in Nova Scotia's offshore. They've made a recommendation to not have any turbines within 25 kilometers of shoreline. There are some people on both sides who say, yes, a great idea, then no, that's not a great idea, or yes to offshore wind, or no to offshore wind. Those perspectives need to be heard, or else we're not going to get this right. So it's part of the reason that the Strait of Canso Offshore Wind Task Force was established in the first place. We make sure we maintain a regular communication with our inshore fisheries folks, and I know certainly from Guysborough County Inshore Fishers, Jenny Boudreau's she's been just an excellent advocate, and communicator of fisheries related issues, and we're using tables like that to learn from each other. We need that conversation conversation and dialogue to happen. I think that's, one of the lessons that was learned early on in communities around the North Sea, where offshore wind's been a part of their lives for 30 odd years, right? Was that we must engage early and we must engage often, because without those conversations, then you're more at risk of benefits not landing in communities, or unintended consequences having detrimental effects to other industries. And these are the things we want to try to avoid if at all possible. So I think, I definitely think we need to maintain those open lines of communication, and would invite anybody to reach out about that, because there's lots of work to do on it. Yeah.
Senator.
Honorable Senators, I see that we have a quorum, so I declare the meeting in order. My name is Paul Mascotte. I'm a senator from Quebec, and I'm chair of the committee. Today, we're conducting a meeting of the Standing Committee on Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Vascotto.
Thank you very much for the invitation to appear today and provide the perspective of the Nova Scotia seafood industry on this foundational piece of legislation. The members of the Nova Scotia Fisheries Alliance for Energy Engagement include associations that represent the majority of the harvesting, buying, and processing sectors in Nova Scotia. Cooperation among all sectors in the fishing industry is unique, and our united perspective is important for you to hear. For this, I thank you. The traditional fishing industry is the lifeblood of the coastal communities, integral to the fabric of this province, sustainably plying the waters and supporting families for generations. Throughout, countless marine industries have come and gone, but the fishery has remained. We're not opposed to sharing the marine space with other users, but simply ask that it be done in a respectful manner that allows all to gainfully coexist by ensuring that incoming industries do not negatively impact the resources that livelihoods rely upon. Sharing marine space requires appropriate legislation underpinning robust regulations to govern development. This is why the conversations today are so important to the coexistence between the fishing industry and offshore tidal, wind, and hydrocarbon development. We appreciate amendments to C49 during the legislative process, but question why further action was not taken. While the activities of the fishing sector are now acknowledged as a principle, this ignores ecosystem impacts of large-scale development and how they may impact the resources harvesters rely on for their livelihoods. Robust legislation must incorporate the differences between activities which it intends to regulate and ensure that potential loopholes are closed. For instance, recovery of damages to fishing resources due to hydrocarbon release are directed to the Fisheries Act, but for industries such as offshore wind, there is no such complementary legislation. Bill C49 must be amended to include this important piece. Legislation should be aligned with existing protections in other legislative vehicles. For example, it appears that Bill C49 inadvertently lifts statutory spatial protections for Georges Bank and Sable Island and allows for the issuance of licenses for development. We suspect this was unintended. Legislation must also be consistent with the maturity of the industry being regulated. Again, C49 falls short. Offshore wind farms in waters typical of Eastern Canada are a global novelty. In other jurisdictions, the act of harvesting wind energy has disrupted nutrient transport, mixing, and thermal conditions. These all underpin important ecosystems and fisheries. Furthermore, a rapidly evolving offshore wind industry clouds any precision on what a development may look like in size, type, and scope, meaning that we are providing authorizations for activities with little understanding of long-term implications to marine life, creating a giant industrial experiment in our offshore areas. Perhaps this is the most concerning piece of all. The harvesting sector needs the security that in the event of unforeseen impacts, there will be continued support of the families and communities that rely on those marine resources. For instance, should scallop stocks disappear because the spread of their larvae is paused because wind energy is harvested and no longer available to distribute them, there must be something in place aside from an insistence that they adjust their activities. The same is true for pelagic fleets left ashore because of gear interactions or if haddock spawning areas no longer function because of failure of key gyres. In short, some assurances need to be provided that industry participants and their families will be able to survive. This would be best achieved through the establishment of a royalty reserve fund ensconced in Bill C49, which would provide a long-term insurance policy to be accessed only if unforeseen impacts of operations are determined. Furthermore, good legislation should provide comfort in the process by which areas are selected for future development. Our members are being bombarded by multiple processes for site selection that began with the government-supported Regional Assessment Committee, which, after they released their interim report providing much-needed spatial focus and important recommendations for coexistence, appear to now be set aside in favor of other provincial and federal selection processes. In short, we are left asking who we should be talking to. We encourage inclusion in this legislation that a single process be employed to identify potential future development areas, as per the original process suggested by this government. Our clear preference is via the regional assessment process that we have worked with cooperatively and collaboratively since its inception. We must turn our attention to end-of-life programs. Wind assets are being demobilized worldwide as equipment life cycles expire. We must learn from our experience in oil and gas developments to establish required reserves funded by royalties to ensure that demobilization efforts can be appropriately supported should proponents become insolvent. Finally, it is important to note that we have the time to develop good legislation. As a province and a country, we are committed to reducing emissions to mitigate climate change, but must acknowledge that standing up offshore wind turbines at an industrial scale or establishing large-scale tidal arrays remain years, if not decades away. Let's take the time to develop robust legislation and a robust regulatory framework that will facilitate good development undertaken without expense to existing marine users. Thank you very much, and we intend to follow up with a written submission to this important committee.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Gaffal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to all the members of the committee, Senate staff, and to the other witnesses attending this panel. I'm participating in this hearing today from the rural coastal community of Margaree, which is located in Unama'ki, part of the unceded and traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq. So East Coast Environmental Law is a nonprofit organization engaging on matters of public environmental law and policy throughout Atlantic Canada. We advocate for provincial and federal law reform touching on environmental health and sustainable development. And we recognize the urgent need for a global transition away from fossil fuels to sources of clean and renewable energy. And we also recognize the need for good law and process that ensures a fair and equitable transition that improves our stewardship of the environment that we all depend on. In the context of Bill C-49, then, that means we support a clear and robust regulatory regime for offshore renewable energy that contributes to long-term sustainable management of our marine ecosystems and resources, and to the healthy coastal communities in Newfoundland and Labrador and in Nova Scotia. So we've conducted considerable research on offshore wind regulation in other jurisdictions, and we're also active participants in the 2 ongoing regional assessments of offshore wind. We support Bill C-49 in principle because we do understand the benefit of a jointly managed provincial-federal regime to plan, assess, and authorize renewable energy projects in the offshore areas of both Newfoundland, Labrador, and Nova Scotia. And we recognize that the bill represents a considerable amount of federal-provincial cooperation and a significant step towards Canada's energy transition. However, we do think that the bill can be made stronger. So we've submitted a brief to the committee providing further details about some of the targeted amendments we recommend for Bill C-49. And so I want to focus my remarks particularly on the need for tiered planning and assessment that can inform decision-making stages at all levels of the offshore renewable energy regime. And so by tiered assessment and planning, we really mean the combination and coordination of high-level planning and assessment processes with lower-level project-specific assessment. Our research has indicated that tiered planning and assessment is a best practice. It has the potential to enable sustainable development of offshore renewable energy in a way that considers and weighs and minimizes conflict with marine ecosystems, ocean users, and coastal communities, and maximizes potential for sustainable use of our renewable resources. Bill C-49 does gesture to the need for tiered planning and assessment. For example, it empowers the offshore energy regulators to conduct regional assessments and strategic assessments, and it sets out their roles and responsibilities as they intersect with the Federal Impact Assessment Act. However, the bill gives the offshore energy regulators complete discretion to conduct those regional assessments and strategic assessments. And it's silent about their responsibilities to conduct project-level assessments when impact assessments under the Federal Impact Assessment Act are not required. We believe that offshore areas should not be open to renewable energy development unless they've first been assessed at a regional and strategical level. And therefore, we recommend that Bill C-49 be amended to require that a regional assessment or a strategic environmental assessment first be used to study the impacts of introducing any offshore renewable energy projects in any area before it's open to a call for bids. We also believe that all offshore renewable energy development, especially as an emerging and new industry in Canada, must undergo project level assessment. And we recommend that Bill C-49 be amended to require that each renewable energy project undergo a project level environmental impact assessment conducted by the regulators when a federal impact assessment is not required. So given the size, duration, and value of the opportunities presented by the development of offshore renewable energy, it's really important to get it right, and we can do that by using identified best practices. Amending Bill C-49 to require tiered assessment and planning will contribute to a strong regulatory regime that facilitates strong relationships amongst ocean users and communities, builds public trust and social license, provides greater regulatory certainty for industry, and supports prudent stewardship of our marine ecosystems. And just quickly touching on that last point, I do want to emphasize that while I've focused my remarks on the need for tiered planning and assessment, we do support many of the bill's provisions. We welcome enhanced federal and provincial powers to protect ecosystems that were highlighted by my colleague at Sea Blue Canada, Jen. And we also support recommendations from the Nova Scotia Fisheries Alliance for Energy Engagement to extend existing protections to Sable Island and Georges Bank. Thank you for this opportunity, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much. We'll move forward to questions. Senator Duchesne. Thank you. My question is addressed to Mr. Kofal. You talked about perhaps a provision that, if I understood you, that the law be mandatory to exposed to a mandatory environmental when trying to set up a wind farm or other renewables. I had a bit of difficulty following you because it seems that the Impact Assessment Act purpose is to examine all projects where there might be a considerable risk for the environment. The law itself already foresees a number of mechanisms. Some stakeholders believe it's too demanding, but all projects are enclosed in this law. So if you impose this, it would impose constraints on the development of renewable resources, which are absolutely important if we want to get to a green economy. Mr. Kofal.
For the question. So under the Impact Assessment Act, the Federal Impact Assessment Act, currently the requirement for an environmental assessment is for a project with 10 or more turbines or an expansion to an existing wind turbine project where there are 10 or more turbines or 50% increase in capacity. So it doesn't capture all projects, but it captures a lot of offshore wind projects. It doesn't capture sort of other marine and renewable projects, but it does capture specifically wind, which is currently the interest. In the existing practice of the offshore petroleum boards, which would eventually become the offshore energy regulators under the bill, if the amendments go forward or the bill goes forward, those offshore boards already have a practice of conducting environmental assessments of projects. So this would really be codifying that existing practice. So it wouldn't be introducing additional layers of bureaucracy or new process. It's really just codifying and providing certainty about processes that are already undertaken by those regulators.
Thank you very much. Senator Arnott.
This question is for Mr. Kofal. Sir, you're advocating for tiered assessment and planning. You say that's a best practice, and you recommended two very specific critical amendments. I'm just wondering then, will those amendments cure the deficiencies in the Act, in your opinion? And then critically, Is failure to make these amendments creating a significant litigation risk for concerning future projects? And then secondly, do you believe that the shift towards performance-based regulation in C49 is effective for environmental protection? And if so, why? And if not, why?
Thank you for that question, or those two questions. So in terms of the amendments for regional assessment and strategic assessment, and then the project level assessments, we do think that those amendments, those targeted, very small amendments requiring what is already a practice of the offshore and is considered a best practice in other jurisdictions, will provide more certainty for stakeholders, will provide opportunities for participants and industries, including the fisheries industry, to engage in the planning. And planning is really important in this new emerging industry to essentially get it right. So yes, I do think that will help alleviate some of the concerns we have with providing the regulators with discretion. And we don't want to have discretion. We want to have certainty. We've been hearing that from everyone that we've been speaking to. There needs to be certainty in this industry, and that can help provide some of that and alleviate some of those concerns. What's that?
Go ahead, sir.
With respect to the second question, I'm not really actually sure what you mean by performance-based provisions under the Act, so I'm wondering if you can clarify that for me.
Well, I won't. That's okay. I'll leave that question. Thank you.
Senator Pitton.
Thank you to all of the witnesses here today. I have a question for Mr. Kofal as well. And my question is, have you spoken with either province regarding your requested amendments, given both provinces have to introduce and pass mirror legislation?
Thank you for your question. No, we haven't directly engaged with the provinces at this point. And the reason for that is primarily that the stage that Bill C-49 is currently at is at the federal level. We do intend to engage at the provincial level, and we recognize the hard work that's been done between the federal and provincial levels. But no, we haven't directly engaged with either of the provinces with our amendments, although we have made our recommendations quite clear to the federal minister and have engaged indirectly through correspondence with the provinces and haven't received a response.
Okay. I was also I appreciate your comments and that overall that you support the legislation. Can you give an example of what projects you foresee not triggering the Impact Assessment Act when it comes to offshore renewable energy projects?
Yeah, so right now, I mentioned the regional assessments of offshore wind right now that are going on in both Newfoundland and Nova Scotia's offshore. And one of the mechanisms under the federal impact assessment that can be used as a result of a regional assessment or a strategic assessment is the ability to exempt future projects that have undergone a regional assessment from an impact assessment. And we actually saw this occur in Newfoundland's offshore through the first regional assessment. There was a regional assessment of offshore exploratory oil and gas drilling. Once that regional assessment concluded, a ministerial regulation was created and it exempted all of those projects from any future impact assessment. And we're worried that that will occur for offshore wind. There's also the situation where there potentially could be a project with 9 or fewer turbines. Those usually aren't commercially viable projects, but there is the potential for like a pilot project or some kind of exploratory technology to be explored using usually like a couple of turbines, so 3, 4 turbines. And this has happened at early stages of wind development in other jurisdictions where they've decided we're going to put a couple of turbines in, and because of the trigger in the Impact Assessment Act requiring 10 or more turbines, that could be another situation. You could not have an impact assessment required.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to all the witnesses for being here today. I'm not a regular member of the committee, but I'm pleased to be here since I'm from Nova Scotia. My first question is to Ms. Jocelyn Haas from beautiful downtown Lunenburg. You spoke about the transition from offshore oil and gas to energy and the protection of the marine biodiversity, and you also spoke at length about the need for protecting the biodiversity of the coastline and offshore. So does this bill strike a balance between environmental issues and offshore energy?
I think probably not comprehensively, but the clauses within Bill C-49 that allow for the rescinding of existing oil and gas leases within protected areas is very relevant to close an existing legislative gap. I mean, I think that, but we can also not ask that of C-49 to enable all of the things that we need in order to sufficiently protect the marine environment, but it is a positive step in the right direction.
So we should be supportive of it, is what you're saying, I believe.
We certainly do recommend, we do indicate our support for Bill C-49 for the reasons I stated in the statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Back to the statement about the massive unknowns and the potential impacts of wind. Have you looked at other countries that have wind power now? And what did you find with the impact that they had on the fishing industry?
And you've addressed that too?
Any of the presenters?
Does anybody want to take that up? Mr. Gafal, maybe? Or Mr. Vescato?
I see Mr. Vescato has his hand up there, so maybe
Okay.
I'll let him speak.
Go ahead,
Give him the
Mr.
opportunity.
Vescato.
Thank you for the question. It's a really unique situation wherever you look in these various different jurisdictions. Really, if you're trying to look at something comparable to some of what is being proposed in the far offshore areas, you're really looking at Scotland, the Dogger Bank. There you're seeing a complete exclusion of fishing activity from those offshore wind development areas that were formerly highly productive are no longer being able to be accessed. At the same time, if you look at the underpinning research for those areas, there's substantial oceanographic changes that are impacting right down to the bottom where many of these little beasties seem to live. If you look down to where we're seeing some expanding development on the east coast of the U.S., there's been ample evidence to suggest that the development, basically the harvesting and removal of wind energy prior to its entering of the ocean, prevents large-scale distribution of larvae that are vitally important to the long-term production of various fishery resources, which relates to this larger kind of cumulative context, which I believe Ms. Power was coming to. Thank you.
Mr. Gafal, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I suppose I'll just add that in our brief to the Senate committee, we have included reference to a number of jurisdictional reviews and legal analysis that we've done, and some of those comparative analyses have looked at Scotland, England, Germany, Denmark, and the United States. So I would point to those resources as additional resources.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you again to the witnesses. For notre deuxième panel.
For our second panel, we are going to welcome from the Governor of Newfoundland and Labrador, Honorable Andrew Parsons, KC, Minister, Industry, Energy and Technology by video conference. And also from the Nova Scotian Government, Honorable Tory Rushton, Minister of Natural Resources and Renewables. So I welcome both of you, and thank you for accepting our invitation.
Minister Rushton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and talk about this important subject of Bill C-49 for Nova Scotia's sustainable future and prosperous. I was pleased to speak about the legislation at the House Standing Committee on Natural Resources in February. The fact that I'm speaking again, this time in person, should underscore the importance of this bill to my province. It is fundamental for the development of offshore wind, and we need swift passage through the Senate for us to keep our work in progress. My message to you today is reinforced by a group of clean energy leaders who are joining us here to show their support. If I may, I'd like to take just a moment to introduce and welcome them. Daryl McDonald, CEO of Boat and Deck Development Corporation on behalf of Chief Wilbert Marshall. Jennifer Dulesky, VP of Business Development and Public Affairs at the Member 2 Development Corporation on behalf of Chief Terry Paul. Warden Amanda Mombriquette of the Municipality of Richmond County. Gordon McDonald, Director of Economic Development of the Municipality of the District of Guysborough. And Elisa Oberman, no stranger here, Executive Director of Marine Renewables Canada. Thank you for being here today. Will Aylan, merci, thank you for all making this journey for this important issue. These leaders have made an effort to come from Nova Scotia to Ottawa today because they believe in the promise of offshore wind. They support this bill and they echo my call for timely passage. Like me and my government, they all believe that offshore wind is pivotal for Nova Scotia's transition to a clean, sustainable future. Like us, they know it is our greatest economic opportunity since the age of sail. Offshore wind and green hydrogen combined are game changers for Nova Scotia. They are key to helping us meet our climate change goals for 2050. Together, they will help us decarbonize. They will bring more green jobs to our province, and they will potentially make Nova Scotia a net exporter of clean energy. In Nova Scotia, our climate change goals are among the most ambitious in this country, and they are enshrined in legislation. The Environmental Goals and Climate Change Reduction Act. A key tenet of the legislation is that our environment and our economy go hand in hand. We don't sacrifice one over the other. We advance all opportunities for our green economy and our clean environment, because that's the only way to secure a sustainable, prosperous future for our children and our grandchildren to come. By 2030, we will be off coal, and we will have at least 80% renewables on our electricity system. And by 2050, we will be net zero. There is no silver bullet to achieve this. It takes a suite of solutions to make them a reality. We're focused on a made in Nova Scotia solutions as much as possible. We've released a number of plans that help us reach our targets. The Clean Power Plan focuses primarily on greening our grid. The Offshore Wind Roadmap focuses on harnessing the power of the world-class offshore wind that our province offers. And the Green Hydrogen Action Plan focuses on this clean fuel that can help with the transition both at home and abroad. They all work together to move us toward a sustainable future. To pursue made in Nova Scotia solutions, we're looking at what role our natural resources can play. Nova Scotia offers some of the best offshore wind resources in the world. Come and visit us if you don't believe me. Our winds rival the North Sea, where the world's offshore wind sector started. Harnessing that power in our backyard is one of the main solutions to help fight climate change and grow our green economy. We will use our geography and our advantage in our pursuit of offshore wind. We have ample capacity to serve both local and international green hydrogen markets. We have an incredible opportunity here, and it's an exciting time for Nova Scotia. We're on the verge of change that generations of Nova Scotians will benefit from. There's a lot of work to be done, and quickly, to make all this a reality. I mentioned our offshore wind map. We're continuing to build it in consultation with our partners. We plan to release the second module this summer. It will focus on building the supply chain for our industry. And we aim to offer license for 5 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, with the first call for bids next year. To do that, we need Bill C-49 to pass. And we also need to pass our own mirror legislation in Nova Scotia. There is not a lot of time. So again, I urge our federal partners to move this bill. New industries need strong regulations. And I said in the House Committee, we have complete faith in the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board to regulate offshore renewables, with an expanded mandate and a new name to match. They will help us safely and responsibly reach our climate change goals. The existing board has 30 years of experience in regulating in complex marine environments. Their skills and expertise are easily transformed to offshore renewables. They are well positioned to expand their scope. We're also building a regulatory framework, and Bill C-49 and our mirror legislation are the cornerstones. With those in place, we'll continue building our framework through good relationships, continuous communications with our partners. That includes a dialogue with the fishing and other industries, as well as our Mi'kmaq partners. about where offshore wind will be sited and how it will be managed. Part of that discussion is through the regional assessment that we're doing in collaboration with our federal partners now. It focuses on identifying where and how these projects can be optimally developed. It will inform governments on the future planning for this sector. It's an opportunity for Nova Scotians to have their say on how the sector and projects should be planned, and we're listening to their feedback. That is why we, as a province, made the decision last fall to pause any consideration of wind development in our provincial waters until we have a framework in place to jointly manage these waters. We have an interim report from the Assessment Committee that is starting to paint a picture for us. There is still time for Nova Scotians to participate, and I encourage everyone to go and have their say. And we look forward to the final report this coming January. But the conversations won't stop there. We'll continue to seek input as we develop our approach. For example, I know there are questions about Georges Bank, and I've said many, many times that we will build offshore wind without harming our traditional industries or our environment. But we can't put the cart before the horse. We need regulatory authority through Bill C-49 and our mirror legislation before we can consider options. Passing this legislation will get one step closer to giving people clarity and certainty that they need in this sector. I want to acknowledge that the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia are strong leaders, supporters, and partners in our transition to clean energy. Just look at the number of projects where they are co-owners, from onshore wind and batteries to green hydrogen and more. Their voices are important, and we value our nation-to-nation relationship. We will absolutely uphold our duty to consult and, where required, accommodate. We already have a process to carry out that duty through the regulator in collaboration with NRCan. This bill will be amended to acknowledge it, and I would venture that it will work well. Chief Terry Paul of Member 2 First Nations wasn't able to be here today. He did ask me to share an excerpt from his written submission to this committee. He says that Member 2 is very familiar with the consultation process, and after outreach takes place and there is no follow-up from communities, the process moves forward. Should the communities feel they need additional information to the outreach and consultation that has already taken place, Member 2 is more than willing to be part of meetings with our partners. I've witnessed the dedication of Chief Paul and other Mi'kmaq chiefs in this process, and I appreciate the show of support that our Mi'kmaq partners are here today. To conclude, I will state that my Premier, my government, and I fully support Bill C-49. It is key to advancing our climate change goals. It is key to growing our green economy in Nova Scotia, and we cannot afford to lose these opportunities and let them pass by. This is a once-in-a-life opportunity for our province and our country. We need to seize it to build our bright, sustainable future. We urge a speedy passage of this and make history in Canada with Canada's first offshore wind projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. We'll go directly to questions. Senator Arnott.
Thank you, Chair. Minister Rushton, thank you for coming today, and thank you for bringing the Mi'kmaq communities that you're working with here today. I think it's very important. I'm very interested in finding out more about the partnership with the three First Nations. It seems to me that this partnership offers a very exciting opportunity, and I believe it is a very good example. I'd like to know more about the development of the partnership, the progress, and the expectations. I assume it's founded on the principles of mutual benefit and mutual respect, and expanding on the peace and friendship treaties of the 1700s, using those principles that underlie that treaty and the spirit and intent of the treaty. It seems to me that this is a very positive, proactive relationship in a modern context, and is a good example of not only the consultation, but further the cooperation and the co-ownership which underlies the work. I believe that your model is actually a model for the rest of Canada, so I'm very interested if you can expand on that, please, sir.
Thank you very much. And what I would say to that is in Nova Scotia, we have another department, New Affairs, that would lead consultations and things. But having said that, even before that consultation began, and I think it speaks volumes that our partners are here today, there's communication that takes place. When these projects started to be, the conversation started a couple years ago, our Mi'kmaq partners were some of the first ones that we had conversations with to lead us down a path that there's openness and willingness to move forward together. And it's a process that I can't speak a whole lot of because it's not my department that does the consultation, but my department's very entrenched in the conversations, which I think are two key differences. Both very important to roll out, and I think our relationship that we have currently as a government in Nova Scotia with all of our Mi'kmaq nations in Nova Scotia, we don't have to have a formal consultation process. I firmly believe in the chiefs that I communicate with. There's an open door process that a phone can be picked up today, tomorrow, and have those conversations that are important that may have to lead to consultation through the control of the Department of Elnu Affairs, which I appreciate the recognition. There's a good pathway forward there.
Well, thank you, sir, and thank you for the good work you're doing. And I do believe Nova Scotia is a great model for the rest of Canada because of the way you work in terms of partnership and the relationships you've built over time, obviously, to get to this point. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Ministers Rushton and Parsons, for being with us today and for explaining to the committee as a whole and to those who are listening how important this legislation is for the people of Newfoundland, Labrador, and for Nova Scotia. I really appreciate that. And Minister Rushton, your comments about Chief Terry Paul were wonderful. He is not only, I'm from Cape Breton, he's not only dramatically changed Member 2, he has been, Member 2 has been an economic driver for Cape Breton and for the whole province. And so thank you very much for speaking about that. Clearly, I'm from Nova Scotia. I'm going to be supporting the bill. So I'd like to talk about just beyond the bill. And maybe regulations and what kinds of things should be there. And one of the things that I've had expressed to me was the job impact of when these projects are coming on board. What will be the job impact in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland? And, you know, I've heard that when Americans were doing these things, that only 40% of Americans were hired. The others were from countries outside of the U.S. Can we have some reassurance that the majority of the jobs that will be coming due to this will be going to Nova Scotians and Canadians? Minister Rushton?
Thank you very much, Senator. Thank you for recognizing that. This is a job as a government we've already tackled because we want our Nova Scotians to be working in the green economy. Nova Scotians for many years have taken pride in training ocean tech education components of ocean tech and sharing our people with the rest of the world that are doing different things in the ocean. Here is an opportunity for us to bring those people home, but through that we're also enhancing educational processes and conversations with places like NSCC and our academia that we need to plan for the future. There's been a number that's thrown around that we may need as this rolls out upwards to 3,200 more tradespeople in the province to build out this sector. 3,200 on top of everything else that's going on with the new home builds, the new grid system that we're looking at within our province and everything else. So we take this very seriously as we're also looking at transitioning away from coal. How can we work with our counterparts in the electricity energy reform as Nova Scotia Power? How can we have those people cross-trained to move into the green sectors as things do transition into more renewables? So we take this very seriously. We want our Nova Scotians to be staying in Nova Scotia, and we also want the door to open to more people come to Nova Scotia to be able to put their roots down in Nova Scotia and call Nova Scotia their home. So we take it very seriously. We're already working with Nova Scotia community colleges to have those training aspects already put into place.
Thank you, Chair. Ministers, thank you so much for being here. It's much obliged. This is a question for you, Minister Rushton. If there's a second round, please put me on it if time permits. Minister, as I know you're aware, the committee has heard some concerns around the duty to consult provisions, and particularly the consultation and engagement processes that involving affected Indigenous groups in the development of Bill C-49. From your perspective, and I know though, and the perspective of your government, do you believe that the tripartite terms of reference for Mi'kmaq Nova Scotia Canada consultation process was adhered to and respected? That the consultation and engagement processes followed by your government and the Government of Canada were done properly and respectfully, consistent with the joint management regime outlined in the Accord Acts? And in addition, could you speak to any additional engagement that the Government of Nova Scotia may have undertaken with Indigenous communities and groups?
Senator, our relationship is very important with our Mi'kmaq, and I think the words that I could use is what Chief Terry Paul has shared, that he believed the engagement went to what it was needed. But what I would say is in a previous answer, I stated that our province looks at it as more than just an engagement. It's an ongoing conversation that we have with our Mi'kmaq friends. So when this legislation was sort of being drafted from our point of view, there was conversations going on with our Mi'kmaq partners and the ones that showed. And at no time did I hear any resistance of that. There was one nation that wrote a letter to our department, and we responded with answering some concerns and such. But I believe that we've gone hand in hand with our Mi'kmaq partners, and we're here today. And I think we share the echo that this is very important for our province, for our Mi'kmaq nations in our province, and for the country as a whole.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, thank you, Minister, for your answer. Minister, this committee did receive submissions yesterday, signed by the chiefs of the Buknag Mi'kmaq Nation and the Boladek First Nation, both of which are also members of the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs, that are calling for swift passage of this bill. Can you speak to why it's important that the Senate adopt this bill in its present unamended form in a timely fashion, as you've stated already that your province would like to enact your own mirror legislation in the early part of this fall?
Yes, thank you very much. And yes, we have to enact our mirror legislation. We very much want to do that early this fall, as quick as possible. But what I could say is it's important for both the province and our Mi'kmaq partners at the same. If this is delayed any longer, past the fall, so we cannot do our mirror legislation, so Newfoundland may not be able to do their mirror legislation in their sessions in the fall, we're going to lose a whole year of investments from these investors and these projects that, quite frankly, they'll leave Canadian Nova Scotia, Canadian Newfoundland waters, and go somewhere such as the North Sea. I sit here today because I feel that's very important. There's billions of dollars of investments that can come to the waters of Nova Scotia with this legislation as we roll out and allow the regulatory framework to start its work. I, for one, as a minister of Nova Scotia, I don't want to see that investment leave Nova Scotia. We have the ability with this legislation to have a safe pathway forward, a safe pathway for existing industry, and a safe pathway for our environment to work to build this sector out hand in hand with all of our partners, whether that be federal, provincial, municipal, or our Mi'kmaq partners and the investors that are coming to Nova Scotia. I can't stress how important this investment would mean not only to Nova Scotia, but Canada as a whole.
Yes, thank you. Minister Rushton, I know that you used a word this morning on a swift passage, and so I know you've mentioned it a little bit, but you've also about the urgency regarding this legislation. Can you tell the committee a bit more why the province is open this bill will pass sooner rather than later? Because I understand that you're in a different position than Newfoundland and Labrador, that you're further ahead on investors wanting to come.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Senator. It's very important for Nova Scotia. As I said a few moments ago, there's investment ready to come to Nova Scotia, but they need the certainty. And I spoke a few minutes ago about how is the education to train for our Nova Scotia green jobs going to take place. Some of that has already taken place, and people are already coming back home to work with these companies that are coming to Nova Scotia. When I sat in the minister chair for the first time in the summer of 2021, offshore wind wasn't in the context, but very quickly as the world changed, jurisdictions were looking at Nova Scotia because of their wind paths. And very quickly, green hydrogen became an idea for Nova Scotia. So now we have investors that are on the ground, spending the time to build relationships, to build capital to invest in this province. Why it's important to us for the swift passage of this bill is that capital is ready to go, but they need the certainty. And in order to have the certainty for this year's capital expenditure, if you will, there's a whole jurisdiction of offshore wind, green hydrogen, renewable energy that are watching today to see what the movement of Canada is going to do, what the movement of Nova Scotia, what the movement of Newfoundland are. I'm not prepared to close that door on that capital investment that could come to our province and our country. It's very important for us, and as it is a new industry, it's very important for us to get the regulatory body into the framework that we need to put the next steps in motion to move forward.
Aucoin, suivi par Senator McConnell.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you, Chair, and greetings to the ministers. I'm from Shirika, and I'm quite aware of your concerns. I'm a bit concerned about what Honourable Parsons has said in response to Senator Manning. The position of FFAW regarding the fishing sector. It's a bit similar to what we heard from Ms. Power this morning. If this legislation passes too quickly, too soon, their membership has a number of amendments that they'd like to put forward. So I'll ask both ministers, particularly Minister Parsons, can you give us some reassurance, some guarantees that there would be no impediments to the passage of mere legislation in the provinces? You have to listen to what the fishermen have to say, but you didn't mention them very much in your presentation.
J'aimerais d'avoir le commentaire du ministre.
Now, I'd like to hear, if I could, from Minister Rushton.
And I would echo Minister Parsons, some of Minister Parsons' comments. My department staff have met with our board's fishery advisory committee at different times. We've had exchange of communications with different fishers in our province. Offshore development in Nova Scotia is nothing new, and I've been very clear from day one. We're not going to jeopardize one industry versus a new industry or another industry. Nova Scotia was built on 3 Fs: fishing, farming, and forestry. And fishing has a strong future ahead of itself in Nova Scotia. And once the regulatory pathway is in place, and with the communication that's going on right now with the regional assessments, we are listening to the fishers. I used it in my opening remarks. We listened loud and clear when they didn't want the inner waters, the provincial waters, to be harnessing the wind until we had a regulatory pathway in place. So we are listening as a province, and we'll continue to listen. Once this bill's passed, there's still many more conversations that do have to take place. Fishing is very important to the province of Nova Scotia, and every fisher that I've talked to, alongside with our Department of Fisheries and Aquaculture, are very involved in this process and communicating with the fishers as well. Very important, and we're not looking to jeopardize that industry one single bit.
Thank you very much. Senator McCollum, followed by Senator Méville-Desjardins.
Thank you. Welcome to Senate.
Thank you.
And I'm going to go back to what Senator Arnott had spoken about with the Mi'kmaq chiefs. I have 2 letters that were shared with me, and in the first letter, it states, after speaking with officials, ministerial, senior staff for Mr. Wilkinson and Mi'kmaq leadership, I can confirm that the consultation terms of reference that should be guiding all legislative and policy discussions in Nova Scotia have not been followed with this bill. Mi'kmaq leadership were not aware of the bill, could not assess it, provide feedback, or meaningfully participate in something that will significantly impact them and their territory. And there was an assembly on May of 2024 with the chiefs, and with that came this letter. Given the significance and from the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs, given the significance and magnitude of this bill and its far-reaching consequences for the assessment of offshore renewable energy projects, we have serious concerns at the prospect of it being unduly rushed through committee deliberations at the Senate. So they were requesting additional time. So we're getting, it says this would provide us an opportunity to complete our analysis of the bill and its potential implications for our constitutionally protected rights and waters of Mi'kma'ki. So we're getting conflicting statements. And I'm just, we need to hear from the chiefs. And I need to know what story is true. So this letter from the chiefs came on June 4th. So did you have discussions with them after that? Or what I'm trying to make sense of the conflicting statements.
Do you want to add to the comments?
Yes, thank you, yes. Thank you, Senator. I can honestly say I've not laid eyes on that letter. But without further ado, that's a concern that I hear as of right now. That would be a concern that I would take on head on with my department, Elno Affairs back in Nova Scotia. If that's a concern from the chiefs, then absolutely we need to have further conversations. But what I will say is I have had conversations with some chiefs since June 4th, I believe you said. I've had conversations with chiefs as of late this week. But that was never raised to myself. That's the first I'm hearing of that letter, to be very honest, today. So it does bear that there does have to be some conversations. But I do think that there are other Mi'kmaq partners that have indicated their urgency about this bill as well. So there does have to be some conversations. But I do think that those conversations have taken place. This is new information to me. It's certainly something that I take very seriously, our relationship, and certainly we'll be taking that back.
But I do want to make a comment about Indigenous rights holders, that there's a lot of identity theft and fraud happening with regarding First Nations and Inuit and Métis rights, and that they need to be verified that they are indeed First Nations or Inuit when you consult. Okay, so I'll ask my second question.
Comment is that this issue, I think the letter was addressed to me relative to the delays and the frustration.
Okay.
As a consequence, we scheduled our meetings, this meeting, we delayed it somewhat, where we can hear completely from the Mi'kmaqs what their opinion in early September.
Okay.
Before we proceed with the clause by clause. So I think they're going to get a full hearing because we're going to have a meeting just for that purpose. Okay. I think there's already been some information contact, but I think we're hearing loud and clear their complaint, and it's not something we'd like to hear. So I think we'll spend some time looking at that issue particularly. You had a second question?
Yes. I'm looking, how would the development of offshore renewable energy affect First Nations and Inuit fishing rights?
Thank you, Senator. It will not, in Park. I've been very clear from the onset of this conversation in our province. Our fishing industry, no matter what industry, Mi'kmaq or non-Indigenous, cannot be jeopardized for a new industry. We did it with offshore petroleum, and I'm quite certain that we can coexist with offshore wind developments with our Mi'kmaqs as a partner as we move that forward.
Thank you.
Deschênes, followed by Senator Wells.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc,
Thank you, Chair. I'll place my earpiece where it belongs. Very practical here. You talked about a very fantastic project in Nova Scotia. How many turbines do you think will be scattered across the coastline? That's my first question.
I guess what I would say is we've announced that we're interested in 5 gigawatts. And something I've learned very quickly in the 2 short years that we've been sitting here as a government talking about this is the development of the technology increases every single day that we have these conversations. So is that 100 turbines that we look at for 5 gigawatts, or is it with new technology 70 that we look at? It's a number that's been juggled around by different investors when they have conversations with myself of what that does look like. But I will be very honest, 5 gigawatts is a starting point that we're looking at Nova Scotia. But to put a number on those turbines of how many would be in the offshore in the distant site, I wouldn't hazard to put a number on that today.
deuxième question.
Thank you. Second question. I understand that the turbines have to be relatively close to shore, and there will be challenges and issues as to the environment. But these turbines, as far as I know and have witnessed, are very, very noisy, and this has caused some problems on the West Coast for the whales that transit through the area. So how do we reconcile? It's not true that a turbine of that size will not change what's happening underwater or the marine environment. It can't be as it was before the absence of turbines. There will be consequences for the biomass and the seabed.
So thank you for that. Yes, Senator, we recognize that. How close they would be to shore, what's been proposed to me in conversations and different expertise is there'd be a bit of a silhouette that you could see from the shoreline out. But I guess to your question, that's the exact reason why we need the regulatory pathway put into place. So the environmental assessments can be reviewed at the right process. So the impacts can be reviewed at the right process. And I think I was very clear in my statements. I've been very clear today. We are not looking to jeopardize our environment either. Hand over hand. If somebody wants to come to our Nova Scotia waters that are shared with our federal counterparts, they have to meet the requirements. They have to meet the environmental standards. They have to meet the fishing standards. They have to meet those goal lines in order to do business in the shared waters that we have off Nova Scotia. So we're not looking to jeopardize any whale movements, fish passages, marine areas, special fishing areas. That's also why we have the regional assessments going out right now to have these conversations. I look forward to that report in January. And with that regulatory pathway, with the reports that we're going to look forward, I do believe that we can have things that can coexist without jeopardizing environment, without jeopardizing fisheries, and have a robust green energy spectrum in Nova Scotia.
Quick supplementary. Investments, the capitalization, is it coming from foreign sources, strictly Canadian sources? Are the Indigenous folk being encouraged perhaps to invest? Where is the majority of your investment coming from?
Thank you, Senator. I think the easiest answer would be it's mixed. So we've had people come to my table. It's foreign investment. It's North American investments, Canadian investments. I I wouldn't risk at answering what the Mi'kmaq conversations have been. I may not be privy to all the conversations, so I wouldn't hazard to answer that for the Mi'kmaq partners that are involved with some of these investors. But it would certainly be a mix. And what I would say, why we're looking at that as a mix, in order to use the green hydrogen, for example, we need to develop the green hydrogen with onshore wind to have it a true green hydrogen aspect. Investors are looking at that. But in order to scale it up on a worldwide demand, the offshore wind has to come into effect. And as I look at it as a Nova Scotian, as a minister and representing the province of Nova Scotia, when they scale it up for a global economy, that's when we can utilize it domestically as well. Nova Scotians will start to reap the benefits as well. So these investments are coming into the province, but it's for the betterment of our province and Canada as a whole as we green our environment.
Senator Wells, followed by Senator McBean.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister Rushton and Minister Parsons, for your testimony so far. Are you supportive of oil and gas development off Nova Scotia?
Certainly. What we said as a government, natural gas is a piece of the puzzle to 2050. So yes, our government is supportive of natural gas offshore. What we look at is the changes in this legislation will allow the regulatory body to look at multiple projects. Where is natural gas or petroleum projects a good fit for our offshore, and where are the renewable energy projects a good fit for our offshore? But the province of Nova Scotia is supportive of petroleum projects.
Thank you,
Senator McBean.
Thank you. I know that we're sort of getting close to time. It's not lost on me that both of the ministers here today are industry, natural resources, and not fisheries or environment kind of thing like that. And I'm hearing, and I'm excited for it too, like the financial upside to both of the provinces. And I'm hearing the words conversation and recognizing a lot. But I know sometimes in conversation there's a difference between when we're listening to the conversation and when we're waiting to talk. And I got a sense in the last panel from Ms. Power that the FFAW felt that people had been waiting to talk to them, that they'd heard from the provinces, but they'd also heard from other people in the provinces that felt they were rushing it through. So balancing efficiency in the environment, BC C49 aims to streamline all the approvals. But you could argue that this comes at the expense of thorough environmental assessments. How can you both ensure that a balance is being struck between efficient project approvals and robust environmental reviews? And if I can add to that, in the previous panel, the East Coast Environmental Law was proposing amendments that make an impact assessment mandatory for every project, regardless of its size, before the bidding process. Because you both need to approve exactly the same thing, maybe you can both speak to how you're balancing this, and then if an amendment like this came in, how would that impact your approval of it?
So thank you, Senator. What I would say is we have, I can only speak for our board in Nova Scotia, but we have a 30-year track record, a positive track record with our board. And our province has a lot of trust in our board that as the assessments come through, there's a deep dive into each application, if you will. We expect no difference as we've worked with our board to get them to where they are today to be ready for the transition into offshore renewables. And as we look at those assessments, we expect nothing less than the standard that they've already set for themselves over the past 30 years. And the assessment of not jeopardizing one industry over the other, the environment, this will all be part of what our board does in Nova Scotia in a partnered avenue with both the federal and provincial governments sitting at the table as well with input.
I'm just going to interrupt a little bit there. I get it's been going for 30 years, but I would say like in the last 5 years, business is being done differently with respect to inclusion of our Indigenous partners. Is that board is it listening? Is it currently listening to the sort of a modern idea of inclusion of all voices?
From my point of view as a minister that they report to? Absolutely, I believe so. But I believe you have an opportunity later this afternoon, maybe that the board is actually going to appear and have a conversation with there. But we have the utmost respect for our board and the trust in our board here in Nova Scotia.
And the suggested amendments from the East Coast Environmental Law Group?
I've been very clear. My premier's been very clear. Our government's been very clear. We are happy with where the bill is today, but to echo the comments of Minister Patterson, Newfoundland, once the bill passes, there's still a need for ongoing conversation, how to improve things as we move forward. That's not just this bill. That would be any piece of legislation that we'd see in the federal or provincial levels.
For our third panel, we welcome from the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board, Ms. Christine Bonnell-Eisner, Chief Executive Officer, Registrar, and from the Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador Offshore Petroleum Board, Mr. Scott Tessier, Chief Executive Officer, and from the International Union of Operating Engineers, Stephen Schumann, Director, Canadian Government Affairs. Welcome and thank you for being with us. 5 minutes are reserved for your opening remarks, and we have to leave the room at 12:15. So we have to respect this obligation to leave the room at that time. So you have 5 minutes, and I will give the floor to Ms. Bonnell-Eisner.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Christine Bonnell-Eisner, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board. I'm delivering my remarks from Ottawa, and I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am in the traditional, unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. Thank you for the invitation to come to speak to you today about Bill C-49, which outlines the Accord Act amendments required for the expansion of our mandate to include the regulation of offshore renewable energy. We support these amendments and are actively preparing for the completion of the bill and becoming the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Energy Regulator. The Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board is the independent joint agency created by the governments of Canada and Nova Scotia. Federally, we work with Natural Resources Canada, and provincially with the Department of Natural Resources and Renewables. We have more than 30 years of experience regulating offshore oil and gas exploration and development activities in the Canada-Nova Scotia offshore area. We are the lead and life cycle regulator and oversee all activities of an oil and gas project from land tenure to exploration through development and finally to abandonment. We do this by recognizing that safety and environmental protection are paramount, and we make sure that operators who work in our offshore area do too. When it comes to any oil or gas activity that an operator proposes to conduct in our offshore area, we go to great lengths to ensure that the regulatory requirements are met before granting an authorization that would allow activities to commence. We implement effective monitoring programs to confirm that operators comply with these requirements during the execution of a program. We also ensure that compliance with legislative requirements are met so that exploration and development of our offshore resources are completed in a safe and environmentally responsible manner. We will do the same with offshore wind and other offshore renewable energy activities. Leveraging the similarities and managing the differences between oil and gas and offshore wind is critical to the success of delivering on this expanded mandate to regulate the broader energy industry in our offshore area. There are similarities in the geotechnical studies, assessment of mid-ocean conditions, risk assessment, and the need to coexist with Indigenous communities, fisheries, and other industries. The majority of what we do now is directly transferable to offshore wind. We recognize that each section of the ocean is unique and each project is unique. We have the technical and regulatory experience and expertise necessary to regulate the offshore renewable energy. We are committed to continuous improvement and invest in building and maintaining the technical competencies and expertise of our staff. We work closely and in our regular contact with the Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador Offshore Petroleum Board, the Canada Energy Regulator, other government departments, and international regulators, and we continue to learn from our regulatory peers, many of those who are already regulating offshore wind. In anticipation for our expanded mandate, we have developed our 5-year strategic plan that describes our strategic priorities and reviewed our organizational structure and skills to determine the required changes for future growth, development, and success of our organization. This work will ensure that we continue to focus and deliver on our current mandate and properly prepare for taking on these important new regulatory responsibilities. As we have for over 30 years, we will continue to work with Indigenous communities, fishers, the public, and other stakeholders to provide information about our regulatory role and to understand their unique and specific insights that should be taken into consideration before we make any decisions. We have our own active and long-standing Fisheries Advisory Committee that is composed of Indigenous and non-Indigenous fishers. We value our relationships with Indigenous groups and the fishing sector and the input that we receive from them. Our relationship with each of these groups remains a commitment as we transition. We are committed and will be ready to be the lead and life cycle regulator and deliver on this new and expanded mandate. We are trusted and recognized for the high standards to which we hold the oil and gas industry accountable, and will continue to deliver regulatory excellence as our mandate is expanded to include offshore renewable energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schuman.
Good morning. On behalf of the International Union of Operating Engineers in Canada, I'm honored to appear before the committee today. The majority of our members build and maintain Canada's infrastructure. We build it all, such as hydro dams, mines, nuclear plants, solar farms, wind turbines, and pipelines, just to list a few things. In principle, we support Bill C-49 and the development of clean energy projects. However, the bill does not address the important issue of ensuring Canadians have the opportunity to work on these projects. We have noticed when large projects are discussed, labor tends to be seen as an afterthought, not a forethought in decision-making. Wind farms cannot be built without a steady supply of labor, and labor should have been a key focus of the bill. The Public Policy Forum estimates that development of 1,000 offshore wind turbines near Sable Island would employ 30,000 Canadians annually during the construction. It sounds wonderful. Unfortunately, there are no guarantees that Canadians will actually fill many of these positions. If the federal government truly wants to support offshore wind, it must take measures to guarantee Canadians work on these projects. We believe it's in Canada's best interest to encourage, through Bill C-49, the adoption of amendments like a project labor agreement, which cover all construction work for the project and utilize Canadian skilled tradespeople and apprentices, while also ensuring any foreign workers are paid a prevailing wage. At a minimum, the bill should strengthen the industrial benefits component found within the Nova Scotia and Newfoundland Offshore Petroleum Board. Some wording was developed to address our concerns, but for various reasons did not pass to the other place. If we look at what's happening in the U.S. on offshore wind, they have the Jones Act, which ensures that between American ports, including offshore platforms, vessels are flagged, crewed, and built by Americans. Some states have project labor agreements in place for offshore wind projects. The Biden administration encourages project labor agreements, community benefit agreements for those projects through offshore leases. In the U.S., there's actually a national agreement with Ørsted, a project proponent which will help build their local workforce by guaranteeing a certain percentage of the workforce for offshore work is local and provided by unions and our American members to shadow and receive job training. This allows building up of a domestic workforce gradually and realistically for work that project proponents would otherwise seek foreign labor to do. But even with this in place, it's estimated currently only about 40% of the work will be performed by Americans. But at least there are attempts in the U.S. to ensure Americans are working on these projects. Nothing like these efforts have been discussed by any level of government in Canada. Unions, including our own, will have discussions with offshore wind project opponents, but with no incentives from the federal or provincial government, it is a challenge for us to ensure Canadian workers are able to work on these projects. As of right now, there's no guarantee Canadians will have a work on these projects onshore or offshore. We ask the committee to consider labor guarantees in deliberation on Bill C-49 and amend the bill to include requirements that project opponents adopt either project labor agreements, Canadian crewing requirements on vessels, and at minimum, some safeguards to ensure Canadians get work on these projects. Project labor agreements are also more than just a guarantee that local workers will have local jobs on these projects. They're also a way for Canada to build a workforce by enshrining targets for the involvement of underrepresented workers, such as women and Indigenous Canadians. These type of agreements are nothing new to Atlantic provinces, in fact have helped Atlantic Canadians obtain work on projects that have impacted their communities. The federal policies and incentives relating to offshore wind development must aim to benefit Canadian workers and their communities. We believe the federal government must take the lead and make every effort to ensure that Bill C-49 reflects the goals of supporting and building Canada's workforce and domestic supply chain. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I start with Senator McBean? You don't. As I cut you off last time, I want to make sure you have enough.
No, well, okay, yeah. I'm wondering, I guess, for either of the boards here, I thank you for coming. If we're looking at, you were saying how that you sort of manage through the implementation of inspections and managing projects, my words, I think from birth to death kind of thing of a project. How do you manage enforcing penalties? Because C-49 establishes a system for administrative monetary penalties for non-compliance. So what specific violations outlined in the bill, such as exceeding noise pollution thresholds or failing to meet environmental mitigation plans, how do you manage inspecting those and applying penalties through your members? And I'll sort of come in with a different part because I'm sure you're going to say same, but different. So we were hearing how, say, Nova Scotia was saying 5 gigawatts can be anywhere between 70 and 100 turbines coming up. And as they're going up, is there an ability to, I don't imagine they all get turned on at the same time, right? Is there an ability to recognize as a project is going underway, do you have the authority to like stop development because after 20 go on and the noise, like the noise disturbance is just needs better inspection and review? Is there an ability to stall a project to make sure that it is following the guidelines that it said it was going to uphold?
Thank you for the question. So in our offshore area, as the regulator, or the board now, but soon to, we're a regulator and will be the energy regulator, safety and environmental protection are paramount in our mandate. So we always, throughout any time through an authorization, if an operation is not meeting the terms and conditions of the regulations or the legislation, we have powers to stop an authorization from going on. But I also want to point out that for any project in the offshore that is 10 turbines or more, but an impact assessment would be required, and that would look at cumulative effects. So that would be looked at, those types of things, prior to a turbine even being installed in the water. But yes, still recognizing that as the technology changes and the environment, there will still be monitoring compliance throughout a project life cycle.
And Ms. Bonnell-Eisner, for the budget, I know that cost recovery is done through the operators. Would you expect any additional costs to be any additional costs for having hydro? Wind power. Would you expect that cost recovery to be absorbed by the current funders in the Newfoundland and Labrador question as well, or would that additional cost recovery be added or split with the wind sector?
So how our budget is set up right now is under the current regime is we're 50% funded by the federal government, 50% funded by the provincial government, and we can cost recover up to 100% from the oil and gas industry in pursuant to the cost recovery regulations. With respect to offshore renewable energy, governments are still looking at what the cost recovery regulations will be and what those requirements will be for us to administer. So as of right now, there is no proposed regulations, which makes sense because the legislation is being amended, but that's still to be determined about what cost recovery requirements will be there for us to administer on behalf of both governments. So it's a decision of governments about what cost recovery will look like.
Thank you for being here this morning. My question is to Ms. Bonnell-Eisner, and I'm hoping that you'll clarify something that we heard from the first panel regarding the Impact Assessment Act. Do we expect any projects under 10 offshore turbines? And If yes, are there any other mechanisms in place for the impact assessments?
Thank you for the question. Based on the conversations I've had with offshore wind companies that are interested in offshore Nova Scotia, they meet with us to find out our role as a regulator, a future regulator of this industry. It's my understanding that the projects will not be smaller. It's not economic to have less than 10 turbines, and in fact, they could be much bigger than that. But there is the provision in the Impact Assessment Act that the project list says 10 or more turbines. However, there's some other options afforded there too. The Minister of Climate Change Canada, so ECCC, could require an impact assessment if there are less than 10 turbines. As well, anybody can request that the minister consider that a full impact assessment be done if there are less than 10, if a project doesn't meet the project list. If it's still determined that a full impact assessment isn't required, we will not authorize a project without a very robust environmental assessment that is done as well. So the operator has to prove to us their due diligence and meet all the requirements for an environmental assessment. So there's many options available.
Maybe the Shane.
Donc,
So perhaps just to follow up, Ms. Bonneau, on the previous question, do you consider that any amendment which was put forward by the environmental group would be necessary in order to assure that there is, in fact, a good assessment of the environmental impact before any project?
Thank you for the question. Without seeing their proposed amendment, I don't want to speak to that, but I am comfortable in the Impact Assessment Act doing a full review. And it's my understanding that the first project, if it is less than 10 turbines, someone will ask for a full impact assessment. This is new to Canada. They want to do it right. But if there isn't a full impact assessment required, if for some unknown reason it is less than 10 turbines, we will, I have confidence in the EA, our environmental assessment requirements that are in the Act right now.
merci. J'ai une autre question.
Thank you. I have a second question for Mr. Schuman. I was trying to follow your logic on the fact that you would like some guarantees that Canadian workers would find jobs, but you began your presentation by saying that there's a shortage of specific labor, unless I misunderstood. But I feel that in Canada, we are in fact in a labor shortage in many areas, including construction, trades. And so I'm somewhat intrigued by your request. If in fact there is truly a labor shortage, why not seek labor abroad? Because if we're in a hurry to get these built, if it's important to protect the climate, perhaps you want to expand on that. Perhaps it's in Nova Scotia situation where you could have access to local expertise and labor, but I just quite figure out the logic of your argument.
Thank you for the question. Let me expand on it. So first, construction is the most mobile workforce in Canada. So you'll have Canadians that work in, for example, Newfoundland and Labrador. If you go to Fort McMurray, they have the largest population of Newfoundlanders outside of the province, and they go there and they come back. Same as Cape Breton. They worked out there and they come back. If you looked at some of the projects that were in Newfoundland, like at Hebron and Long Harbour, we actually, through project labor agreements, brought in the female workforce up to 20%, and typically in construction it's 5%. And when the project was there, they were working, and they were very happy working construction. There's no more jobs, they're out. So there's an opportunity when these projects come to train the workforce in Canada, be it women in the construction trades or Indigenous communities, and get them trained to work there. And I think there are maiden solutions in Canada that we can have the workforce available in construction, but there have to be opportunities for them to work. And so I think if we have some guarantees, we can build the workforce. Can we supply it all? Well, if 1,000 wind turbines come in, that project comes today, it's going to be very difficult, right? But if we know it's coming down the road, we can plan for it and we can start training and have people ready and available. And in construction, and I was here on C50 earlier, if we can plan things out and there's coordination, you can, I think, address the shortages that are there. In a perfect storm, no, we won't. But I don't think we're going to have everything built at the same time. Newfoundland said they're a bit behind, and Nova Scotia's a bit ahead. So I think there's opportunities for us to address this by having primarily Canadian workforce. The other thing by having Canadian workforce, you create a domestic supply chain, right? And I think that's the other part we have to see, because if you're bringing foreign crews to work, they're going to bring in foreign suppliers, right? So I think there is a lot of things here at play, and that's why I said labor is always an afterthought, and it actually should be a forethought where you look at what you need for labor, plan it, then you can then figure out what you need in the future. And sometimes that gets skipped. And I think it's important that we need to deal with that.
Commend you on the women
Yeah.
in construction. It's extremely difficult. In
Yes.
Quebec, we have less than 5%.
Yeah.
Very much. We're going to go to second round, but we only got 14 minutes, so I ask all three of you to make it short and sweet, including our response. Senator McBean.
Super easy, because Senator Meville-Deschênes just answered it. And it was a great answer. Thank you, because I also was very happy to hear the inclusion of your, focusing on women, but also for the Indigenous and the non-white. Now I'll just make it a comment. Please continue to provide training and onboarding for those communities to be taking these jobs also, because I was thinking the C50 conversation also. So that was it.
Thank you for your presentation. And I don't know if this question belongs here. In the new Division 5, there is the regulator's authority to issue, to call for bids. And it prescribes the terms, conditions, and criteria to be specified in the call for bids. And with Division 2, it says the regulator may issue a submerged land license for any Crown Reserve area without making a call for bids in specified circumstances. And what would those be? Because when you're looking at calls for bids, it's to ensure a full and fair opportunity to participate on a competitive basis, right? And then it goes back that the regulator must make a new call for bids again, so it's mixing me up.
Thank you for the question. So with respect to land tenure, there is, issuing a license. So a call for bids is the process which we administer on behalf of governments for licenses. So the clause you're talking about, when you can have do a separate process for a submerged land license, that is not going to be a typical process. And the most common opportunity for that, my current understanding, is that would be for a transmission line. So we would administer a call for bids process for a company. They would get a submerged land license through a competitive process. And then once they get that license and they want to work through development, there has to be a transmission line to get that electricity from an offshore turbine to the shore. So in that situation, there would just be a submerged land license for the corridor where the transmission line would go. So it's a special circumstances, and it's not the norm.
Thank you.
I could. When you read the act, you have a lot of power. You're very, very important, as Senator Wells would very much know. You're very important to the process because you're independent, and the result is very, very important. But you know what? In society, sometimes you have this formal authority that you cannot do this, and you have a lot of tools available to you. But sometimes the informal environment is totally contrary to that, whereby there's maybe pressure. Don't shut that. Don't do that because there's an immense effect on the economy. People will complain. And this person will say this. So sometimes the informal, the pressure is more significant than all the formal tools you have to punish. How do you deal with that? You're part of the same community. So if you shut down something, your town's going to hear about it, and they're going to criticize you because it's always very wrong. How do you manage that? And maybe my concern, maybe it's mislaid. Maybe I'm offside.
I think the one thing I will say is, because they mentioned, again, I would like more outreach for them to do with labor. I know they reach to the fishers and indigenous groups, but if they're provinces, I think you need to talk to the workforce and ensure that this all works. But that's my lens on the bias.
Ms. Eisner.
So we've been around for, as I said, for over 30 years, and we're comfortable with the tools we have. Just to remind people, it's not as if once this bill passes, the turbine's going to be installed in the water the very next day. This is 7 to 10 years out because there is a robust authorization process, and there will be an impact assessment act too. So there will be a lot of times to have the input that's important from Indigenous communities and the fisheries, as well to consider all of those. So when those difficult conversations are happening or considerations, the governments are involved, and they'll tell us when an area is open for business.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our witnesses for being with us this morning. Much appreciated, and we learned a lot, and we probably still got lots to learn, but we're making progress. So thank you very much for being with us today, and I adjourn this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Please tune in again to find out what we will be talking about on The Record.